Hello, this is Ask the Pastor. My name is Pastor Ryan Gaffney. I'm here at College Park Presbyterian Church, and I'm answering all of the questions that the internet dares to send me. Today's question is this: does God have a calling on my life? And if so, how do I discern what that is? That's a hard question, because in many ways, yes, and in many ways, no. Let me explain what I mean. I think there are some people, very few people, for whom God has a very specific and direct call that is pretty all-consuming of their whole life. Noah, build me an ark. Jonah, go to Nineveh, that kind of thing. And they're given very little choice in the matter, and they need to go and obey. I think there are a somewhat larger group of people, though still not everyone, for whom God has called to a particular vocation. Some vocations are callings. I think being a pastor is certainly a calling. Being a teacher is a kind of calling. But sometimes you just meet someone and you're like, you're a lawyer. You know, like that's just who God created you to be. And what you need to do is honor God through the practice of law. That's what you're called to. It's what you're created for. Sometimes you meet someone and you're like, that is an electrical engineer. You just can tell that they're doing what God called them to do, that God has a calling on their life through a particular vocation or a job. And so that's often recognized most immediately as a calling. I think for the majority of us, it's even less specific than that. God has calls on us at various times and at various places to love particular people or do particular things. And God has given us gifts. And God expects us to use our gifts to glorify Him and to create peace and justice in the world. But the exact shape that we take when we seek to be faithful to those gifts may be up to us. And I think for a lot of people, it is. So that means we don't necessarily have to fret about like, oh no, I missed my gap year travel experience. And if I'd done that gap year, I might be a intercultural scholar today. I love people. I love connecting people to people. I think God created me for that. And that was my calling. And I missed my calling. Well, it may be that God would have called you to that in that context. But it actually may be that God has a different calling for you now, that the next exit on the freeway is just as good as the last. Here's the point. I think most of us have a tendency to assume that we are Frodo in our own rendition of Lord of the Rings, and that the Iluvatar is somehow or another counting on us to bring the ring to Mount Doom. And that might be true for some of us. It might be true that some of us really do have a very important part to play in the unfolding chapter of history that comes next in God's grand story. But for the majority of us, just like for the majority of the cast members of Lord of the Rings, we might interact with an important part of the story once or twice in our lives. And in the meantime, we'll find the most joy and the most truth doing the mundane things God created for us. So if you look at the cast list of Lord of the Rings, right? Somebody's there just to give the pint to Merry. You know, someone sits in the Shire and grows pumpkins while the Fellowship are out on their journey. And that's not stupid, and that's not disobedient, and you won't be doing anyone a favor if you go out and leave the Shire anyway because you think you're supposed to be Frodo. You're supposed to grow pumpkins, and it may be that by growing pumpkins, you make the kind of place that the Shire is, a place worth saving, a place where people are peaceful and happy. I love a quote by Martin Luther about vocation. He says that the Christian shoemaker doesn't glorify God by putting little crosses on his shoes, but by making good shoes. So, all of us, in some ways and at some times, are called by God. God speaks to us and calls out and says our name and says, Ryan, come hither, do this, do that. But God also gives us a lot of freedom. And with that freedom, we can appreciate and enjoy the great and the small. If this answered your question, I hope that you'll share it. If it didn't answer it, I hope you'll get more specific. Ask me again in a different way, and maybe I'll not get so tangential about Lord of the Rings. Finally, if you've got your own question, I hope you'll send it to me down in these comments. You can also, like and subscribe. That would be really cool. And you can watch these other videos where I answer other questions. Thank you very much.